You wake to the smell of warm bread. Not ambrosia, not dew on golden leaves, not the dry mineral scent of Olympus after a lightning storm, but bread. Honest, crusty, mortal bread. And it's perfect. You are not in a marble palace today. No singing muses or eagle-carried wine jars. No satyrs arguing over whose flute is loudest. You're somewhere quieter. A valley, perhaps. A gentle slope of olive trees. There's a village tucked beside a river, and in that village, a small bakery with ivy creeping along its stone walls like it has nothing better to do. That bakery belongs to you. Technically, your name is not in any hymn. You're not one of those nymphs. You're a dryad or maybe a naiad, it depends on the century and who's telling it. Once you were assigned to a glen, then to a spring, eventually to a very mediocre fig tree. But lately you bake. This was never the plan. Eternal life, yes. Graceful frolicking, yes. Ankle jewelry, certainly. But sourdough starters? Not originally on the scroll. Still, here you are, half divine, flour-smudged, and content? You hear the bell above the bakery door jingle. That sound again. Clear and soft like a harp string made of copper and sleep. The villagers have started to arrive, sleepy and unwashed, offering eggs, gossip, and honey in exchange for your loaves. You nod politely. You hand out bread. You forget briefly that you're not supposed to age. Here's your major historical fact for the day. In ancient Greece, nymphs were often associated with specific places, springs, groves, trees. But by the Hellenistic period, local beliefs began blending with domestic routines. People believed nymphs inhabited not just wild places, but even wells and ovens, especially those used communally. Nymphs had gone local, hyperlocal. You give a round of barley bread to an old shepherd. He tells you it cured his daughter's cough. Didn't, but it made her smile. Here's your obscure mythological tidbit. One fragmentary source from Arcadia tells of Argestia, a river nymph who abandoned her spring to live among villagers. She ran a kitchen, gave away grain, and eventually forgot her immortal duties. Scholars aren't sure if this was a real cult or just a good excuse for stealing bread. Historians still debate whether this was reverence or rural fanfiction. Either way, your back hurts slightly, and your hands have started to wrinkle. Just a bit. There's a cheeky warning here. You probably won't make it through this day. Too many loaves. Too many dreams. That's fine. Neither will the bread. Before we go on, take a moment. If you're still awake, do consider liking this video. It helps more than you'd think. If you're listening in bed, comment your location and local time. We'd love to know where you're resting from. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. The ovens are warm, the nymph is tired, and the story is just rising. You roll dough between your palms like it's prayer. Outside, the sun drips slowly over the mountains like honey sliding off a spoon. Inside, the scent of fennel and wood smoke lingers on everything. Your sleeves, your hair, the cat asleep in the flour sack. The villagers are gone for now, back to their vineyards and olive presses and polite arguments about gods. You're alone. Well, mostly. There's a small statue in the corner, carved from river rock. It vaguely resembles you, if you squint and ignore the wildly exaggerated eyebrows. Someone brought it as an offering. It holds a raisin cake. You never asked for worship, but you didn't reject it either. Here's your historical fact for the hour. In some rural parts of ancient Greece, household deities blurred with nymph lore. People left cakes or bowls of porridge near ovens or hearths, hoping for fertility, good crops, or dreams without snakes. These offerings were often anonymous. Just flour and hope. You get a few of those, mostly from children. The older villagers don't believe you're anything divine. You've got too much of a smirk, too much sarcasm in your shoulder roll. But the children, they stare at you like your eyes might blink in slow motion, like you might turn into mist mid-sentence. You don't. Mostly. Here's your obscure tidbit. One rural myth from Thessaly mentions sweet-breathing nymphs, who were once seen pulling loaves from hot earth during a famine. The villagers tried to follow them, but the nymphs vanished into smoke. The only thing left behind was a perfect sourdough boule and a faint smell of thyme. Your own sourdough has a name. You call it Philostratus. He's temperamental but dependable, like a demigod with good manners. You feed him figs. He rewards you with a perfect rise. You check the sky. Clouds are gathering. You should go back to your spring, to your rock, to your timeless, ageless responsibilities. But the next batch is ready, and there's a widow down the road who always buys 2 loaves. One for herself, and one for the husband who left too soon. You're a nymph, but today you're also her baker. Let the gods wait. The rain arrives as a suggestion. Just a few drops, the kind that pretend they're not sure if they're staying. The village exhales. Mud rises, shutters groan, and the goats make that nasal complaint they save for damp mornings. You sweep the bakery floor with a reed broom older than some temples. You suspect it's become partially sentient out of sheer stubbornness. The clay oven hums beside you, still warm from the early batch. There's one last roll tucked in the back, slightly overbaked, crust like armor. You bite into it. Tastes like triumph and bad timing. The door creaks open. It's the potter's apprentice. Wide eyes, clay on his sleeves, and the frantic energy of someone mid-mishap. He holds up a jug. It cracked, he says, but the inside's still good. It always is. He trades you olive oil for a poppy seed loaf. Then he stays for a moment, pretending to adjust his sandals, staring at your oven like it might grant wisdom. You nod politely, and he leaves, pretending it was a business visit. You've started to learn these little village performances. They act as if you're part of the scenery, but some still think a smile from you might ensure good harvests or healthy lambs. You don't mind. Mostly. Here's your major historical fact. Ancient Greek bakeries were often semi-public spaces, blending commerce, ritual, and rumor. In some towns, bakeries were built into communal courtyards. Ovens served as both sustenance and symbolism. A hearth without a household. That's what you are, you think. A hearth without a household. A divine spark with no thunderbolts. Here's an obscure tidbit. One Attic inscription mentions a bread maiden of the sacred grove, who was granted a tax exemption for feeding pilgrims on festival days. Some scholars think this was a priestess. Others wonder if it was a clever baker with a good myth and better timing. Historians still debate whether this line refers to an official title or just very enthusiastic marketing. Outside, the clouds have committed. Rain falls in sheets now, soft and rhythmic, like the world is being tucked in under a damp blanket. You light a small oil lamp and sit near the oven. For the first time in centuries, you feel something unfamiliar creeping into your fingertips. Time. You glance at your reflection in the oil's surface. There are lines around your eyes, not cracks, not breaks, just little etchings of days well used. You blink. You smile. The lamp flickers. Somewhere nearby, thunder mutters a complaint. You don't answer. Evening arrives like a well-mannered ghost. It knocks softly, dims the corners of the sky, and settles itself into the crevices of the village without ceremony. You place your hands on the counter, smooth olive wood, worn soft by 100 years of kneading and 1,000 elbows worth of leaning, and begin measuring out barley flour. You've stopped using exact weights. You listen instead to the way the flour sighs, to how the water behaves when it meets your fingertips. You've learned that ingredients are less about obedience and more about negotiation. The door swings open again, this time letting in a pair of sisters, both with wind-blown hair and arms full of herbs. They're arguing about something you don't catch. One is grinning. The other looks like she just lost a bet involving fennel. They leave behind a bundle of mint and a promise to come back for honeycakes tomorrow. You nod, barely, but something catches in your chest, warm and oddly mortal. Here's your historical fact for the evening. Many nymphs were originally considered aspects of nature, not fully separate beings. Over time, especially in local myths, they gained personality, preferences, even occupations. Some were midwives, some were healers, and a few, at least in village stories, stayed too long in one place and grew fond of the routine. You once danced with Artemis under a crescent moon. Now you fold dough with the grace of repetition. And it's enough. Here's a curious myth fragment. A minor text from the island of Lemnos describes a bread-breathing nymph who had no shrine, only a window ledge where people left pears and folded poems. No one knew where she lived, but their dreams, they said, smelled of cinnamon and smoke. Historians still debate if this was syncretism, early Christian overlay, or someone just really missing their village baker. You wash your hands slowly in a basin by the door. The water is cold, mountain-fed, and tinged with rosemary from yesterday's rinse. Outside, the stars begin to yawn. You stretch just a little and feel something shift in your back. A reminder, not pain, just the echo of an age you weren't supposed to reach. You've been forgetting things lately. Not just immortality or how to summon mist from moss, but words. Divine words. Sacred syllables. Instead, you remember oven temperatures, and who likes their crust chewy. You sit by the oven, sip a cup of lukewarm barley tea, and rest your feet on a stone worn smooth by years of standing in the same spot. The lamp glows. The rain has stopped. The village sleeps, and so soon will you. You dream of dough, not metaphorical dough or divine revelations about the yeast of life, just actual rising, gently bubbling dough. It stretches and sighs beneath a linen cloth, and you watch peacefully as it breathes. Morning returns with its usual lack of subtlety. A rooster yells. A cart will wobbles past your door with a dramatic squeal. Somewhere, a child is crying over the great injustice of being handed the smaller fig. You stretch slowly, carefully. You're beginning to understand why mortals sigh when they wake up. There's a kind of poetry in joints that negotiate. You light the hearth again, kneading a quiet batch of lemon bread while the day blinks itself awake. Here's your historical fact. In many parts of ancient Greece, bread was offered to the household gods each morning before anyone else could eat. The first bite belonged to the spirits, sometimes even to forgotten nymphs. These tiny rituals weren't grand. They were often half-remembered, mumbled through yawns, paired with a quick apology for overbaking. And so, with a small smile, you set aside a piece from the first loaf and place it on your windowsill.
No ceremony.
Just a crumb of habit, sweet with citrus. The village slowly returns. A shepherd stops by to ask about yesterday's rye. You give him 2 extra slices because he smells like rain and sincerity. The twins from the herb stall leave a posy of lavender and take your entire tray of sesame twists without asking. They wave. You wave back. You've stopped keeping coin, really. What you need, people bring. What they need, you bake. It's not commerce. It's something older. Here's your obscure tidbit. In a fragment of an old Thessalian folktale, a nymph is said to forget her name in the smell of roasting walnuts. She grows old, her hair turning flower white, and lives out her days exchanging cakes for blessings whispered in basil leaves. Historians still debate whether this tale was a caution against staying too long in the mortal world, or a tribute to it. The sun climbs slowly overhead. You pause your baking to sit outside for a moment, your apron dusted with flour, your hands warm from kneading. The olive trees sway in soft rhythm. A bee lands on your thumb, stays, then leaves. And you think, for the first time in a long time, you don't miss the glades. There's a festival coming. You can smell it in the wind before anyone says a word. The streets begin to hum with that particular energy mortals get when something is about to be over-decorated and underprepared. Bright cloths appear in doorways. Someone strings dried oranges from one lamppost to another. A boy runs past, clutching a garland of onions like a prize. And just like that, the quiet bakery becomes, well, less quiet. You've been volunteered, as usual, to make 100 honeyed bread spirals shaped like lion tails. No one knows what lions have to do with the occasion, but everyone agrees the shape is festive. You mix the dough slowly, rhythmically. You hum as you twist each spiral. You pretend the order doesn't slightly annoy you, and in return, the dough pretends not to rise too quickly. Here's your major historical fact. Festivals in ancient Greek villages were often layered events, equal parts sacred and chaotic. Baking competitions weren't uncommon. In some regions, the best sweetbread would be offered to a local deity. In others, it was just eaten immediately by whoever got there first. Records often blurred the line between sacrament and snack. Your liontail spirals will likely end up as both. As the oven warms, the smell begins to leak into the street. You hear a child gasp. You smile. Here's an obscure tidbit. A recently translated inscription from Euboea lists a dough mistress of the Spring Games, whose duties apparently included baking fig pastries and discouraging goats from eating ceremonial garlands. The official title was Archantessa Philos, or Lady of Dough. Historians still debate whether the title was honorary or a polite way to bribe someone into baking for free. By afternoon, the bakery is a swarm. You hand out buns with stern nods. You shoo out a teenager trying to pocket 6 in his tunic. You share a private joke with the butcher's daughter, who's stolen the same bun 3 festivals in a row and still thinks you haven't noticed. The day wears on, bread vanishes, and you finally sit again, back sore, fingers sticky with honey. You look at your reflection in a bowl of water. Your hair is streaked with flour and a bit of ash. Your eyes are tired, yes, but they're not the eyes of a nymph anymore. They're the eyes of a baker. and you're starting to think that might be enough. Night returns like an old friend who doesn't knock anymore. You sit by the oven, feet tucked beneath you, a linen cloth in your lap that still smells faintly of cloves. The festival is officially over, marked by a poorly timed trumpet, 3 children crying from too much honey, and one very confused goat standing in a garland of onions. You made 112 lion-tail spirals in the end. 2 extra for luck. None remain. The bakery is still but not quiet. There's that soft ticking, the kind that only comes after a long, warm day. Wood creaks. The fire sighs. A mouse somewhere debates the morality of stealing crumbs from a former goddess. You're too tired to care. Here's your historical fact. In some remote Greek villages, bakeries also served as informal gathering spots after festivals, where elders would share stories and reheated breads, recounting the gods' misadventures like poorly remembered dreams. These post-celebration lulls were sacred in their own way, a collective breath after too much joy. You like this part best. After the glitter has blown away, when even the gods would sit down, loosen their sandals, and grumble about sore feet. Outside, the village falls back into its comfortable silence, and you, eternal, impossible, flower-streaked you, rest your cheek against the warm edge of the oven. Here's an obscure cultural fragment. In one rustic hymn fragment from the Cyclades, a lost nymph of the hearth is said to whisper lullabies to cooling bread. Some say her voice helped loaves rise sweeter. Others think it was just the yeast. Historians still debate whether this was literal magic or early marketing for home baking. You hum the melody anyway. It's not the same tune you once sang to oak trees and riverbanks. It's slower now, fuller, less divine but maybe more human. And when your eyes flutter shut, the scent of cinnamon and ash clings to your thoughts like a blanket. You wake before the sun. There's no rooster this time.
No clamor.
Just the pale blue hush that lives between night and morning, where even the birds seem reluctant to begin. You stretch. You wince. You crack a knuckle that may or may not have existed in your immortal days. The dough was prepped last night. One final batch tucked under a linen cloth, gently fermenting beside the oven. You peel it back like unveiling a secret. The dough has risen perfectly, soft as a sigh, speckled with herbs from the twins' last visit. You divide it gently, shaping each round with care.
No rush.
No orders. Just breakfast. Here's your historical fact for the hour. Ancient Greek breakfasts were often simple. Barley cakes, olives, perhaps a smear of cheese or honey. But some temples also offered dawn bread to travelers. Small loaves made with fennel or sesame, left on stone steps as both sustenance and welcome. You like the idea of dawn bread. So today you make 5 extra. You wrap them in linen, still warm, and set them quietly on doorsteps as you walk. Barefoot, slow, unnoticed. It's not magic. You don't vanish into mist. You just know how to walk like someone who belongs. The village is softer in these hours. Even the stones seem to whisper more politely. A shepherd nods to you without words. A child stirs in her sleep beside an open window. Here's your obscure tidbit. In a faded piece of graffiti on a Delphi storeroom wall, someone once scrawled, "The bread goddess walked by. I forgot to bow." The phrase may be a joke, or a poem, or just a baker with too much time and a stylus. Historians still debate whether it refers to an actual deity or a beloved village baker with a reputation for miraculous crusts. You return just as the sky turns gold. Back to your little oven. Back to the linen cloths. You sit on the threshold, legs crossed, eyes half-lidded, sipping something herbal and utterly unmemorable. And for a moment you forget you were ever anything more than this. You forget the river that gave you your name. You forget the nymph sisters who used to braid your hair with lily stems. You forget the immortality sitting quietly at the edge of your soul like a guest who stayed too long. All you remember is the smell of warm bread, and how it feels when someone bites in and smiles. The olives have gone too soft. You don't blame them. It's been unusually warm, and the amphora you keep them in has a crack so fine you only noticed when your bread started tasting faintly of vinegar. You make a note to trade for new ones. That's how it works now, 1 loaf for a bundle of figs, 2 loaves for strong wine. And 3 if you want someone to listen while you complain about olives for an hour. Immortal economy. Strange. Efficient. Slightly damp. You scrub the amphora with a paste of lemon and ash, muttering to yourself like someone twice your age and 10 times your patience. Here's your historical fact. In ancient Greece, amphorae were reused endlessly, sometimes patched with wax or resin, sometimes repurposed as grain jars, planters, or even burial urns. A cracked amphora was not trash. It simply became something else. The ancient world was stubbornly good at reimagining. A bit like you. You repurpose, too. Once a forest spirit with fingers like mist. Now a baker with flour under her nails. Once immortal. Now something gentler. You use the last of the soft olives in a tapenade and swirl it into a dough, just to see what happens. Strange. Sharp. Interesting. Not all bread has to be beautiful. Here's your obscure tidbit. A papyrus fragment from 3rd century Egypt records a recipe for angry bread, a coarse sour loaf meant to express annoyance with the gods. It was left at crossroads and eaten only if the gods hadn't replied. One line reads, "Add vinegar until the dough protests." Historians still debate whether this was satire, sarcasm, or a sacred culinary temper tantrum. You try making something similar. Yours doesn't protest. Sulks a little. The sun tilts westward. You package your moody bread and trade it to the scribe in exchange for paper and silence. He eats the whole thing while copying some legal decree about goat theft. Doesn't even flinch. You're not sure if that's a compliment. The stranger arrives at dusk. You hear them before you see them. Soft footsteps. A slight hesitation at the edge of your door. The kind of silence that sounds like it's holding its breath. You don't look up. You're shelling almonds into a chipped bowl and pretending not to be curious. Bread? The voice asks. Is dry, kind, hesitant. You nod, still not looking. You offer them a seat, cup of water, a crust of bread that's still warm. They eat in silence for a long while. Finally, they say, "You're not from here." You raise one eyebrow the way bakers do when someone points out that ovens are hot. You've been here for decades now. You're from here the way moss is from the rock. The stranger shrugs. You smell like pine. They add and take another bite. Here's your historical fact. Many traveling philosophers and mystics in the ancient world relied on village bakers for their daily meals. In return, they often left poems or proverbs behind, some etched into oven walls, others tucked into flour sacks. One bakery in Athens reportedly had over 70 phrases scratched behind its counter, including, "He who eats quietly lives wisely." You wonder if the stranger is one of those, or something else entirely. There's something familiar about them, like the echo of a river you haven't seen in centuries. You pretend not to notice. Here's your obscure myth fragment. In one obscure version of the myth of the nymph Daphne, she does not turn into a tree. She bakes bread near a spring and feeds travelers until they forget her name. One leaves her a note carved into a fig pit. "You are more than escape." Historians still debate whether this was a lost version of the myth, or just a new one that slipped in when no one was looking. You clear the crumbs. The stranger thanks you, pauses, and then, just before they leave, they say, "You know they still tell stories about you, don't you?" You smile. "They tell stories about the moon, too," you say. "Doesn't mean the moon listens." Then you close the door slowly and tuck the last almond into your apron pocket. Rain arrives at midnight. Not the dramatic kind, the gods are arguing on Mount Olympus kind, but something quieter, steady, thoughtful. The kind of rain that remembers things you've forgotten. You lie on your back near the oven, eyes open, watching shadows flicker across the ceiling as droplets drum a sleepy rhythm outside. Everything smells of time, smoke, and clean earth. It's been decades since you danced in the rain. Not that you're feeling especially spry now. You settle for opening the door and sitting on the step, letting a few errant drops kiss your ankles. Here's your historical fact for this damp moment. In rural Thessaly, old rain was sometimes collected from cisterns and used in ceremonial baking, believed to bring the memory of the sky into the bread. The bread wasn't always eaten. Sometimes it was just left on hilltops for the wind. You think about trying it. You've got a bowl. You've got a hill. What's missing? Right, ambition. Instead, you drink warm spiced milk and imagine the bread you would make. Something airy, a little bitter. A crust that sings when tapped. You're startled when you find yourself humming. The same old Nymph tune. Slower now. Rewritten by years. Here's your obscure cultural curiosity. One forgotten cult of the goddess Hestia believed she had a twin, never named, who chose not to guard the hearth but instead wandered, baking loaves at crossroads, blessing homes with breadcrumbs. Her name is lost, but a prayer to her remains etched in a cracked stove tile. Bake with me, walk with me, rise in me. Historians still debate whether this twin was truly worshipped or simply whispered about by bakers who needed someone to talk to. The rain slows. You finish your milk and return inside. The oven is cooling but still warm enough to lean against. And somewhere in the deep pause before morning, you wonder, was this what immortality was supposed to feel like? Not endless, just unhurried. You forget your name today, not in the worrying "where did I put my memory" sort of way. More like it slips out of reach for a while and you don't chase it. The village calls you Miss or Baker or that one with the nice bread and weird eyes. It's enough. You knead dough until your wrists ache. The shape of your name used to sing in your bones, vibrating with every star and syllable. Now you barely notice when it's gone. You hum instead. Your loaves today are shaped like shells. A nod to your earliest days, when you slept beside tidal pools and argued with starfish. Here's your historical fact. Some Hellenistic bakers shaped their bread to resemble religious symbols. Sheep, fish, crescent moons. Shells, 2. Often appeared in offerings to sea deities or river nymphs, meant to please the spirits that made the waters run clear. You don't miss the sea, but you do miss the feeling of being able to sing to a stream and have it answer. The bread at least answers. It puffs up cheerfully in the oven, golden and a little smug. You set a few shell loaves aside, wrap them in old festival cloth, and tuck them into the satchel of the goatherder's son when he's not looking. You leave another beside the village well. Here's your obscure myth detail. One fragment of an Anatolian tablet refers to a nymph who placed her voice in bread, so that her lovers could hear her long after she vanished. The bread was said to sing at dawn, or maybe hum. The translation is debated. You press your ear to a warm loaf. Nothing, but still you smile. That evening the stranger returns. They say nothing, but take a shell loaf and sit with you on the threshold. Rain has freshened the air. Somewhere, a bird attempts a song and gives up halfway through. Do you remember your name today? They ask. You shrug. I remember the smell of sea fennel, you say. And I remember being taller than trees. That'll do. They nod. It's enough. The oven needs mending again. The stones shift over time like old knees or unsupervised children. You crouch beside it with your sleeves rolled up, brushing ash from the mortar, poking at cracks that weren't there last week. The warmth is still there. It just takes coaxing now. You understand. Some days you need coaxing too. You're rebuilding with river clay, thick, cool, dependable. You work slowly, your hands finding the rhythm the way they always do, like brushing someone's hair or winding yarn. Here's your historical fact. Traditional ancient ovens, especially Tabown and clay dome styles, were often patched with mixtures of straw, ash, and animal hair to retain heat and resist crumbling. In parts of the Levant, women would sing while repairing them, treating the oven as both tool and elder. You hum something tuneless. It's not exactly a song, more like a weather forecast made by heart. The stranger is helping today. They're quiet, but not in a burdensome way. They hand you stones. They press their thumb gently into the wet clay, leaving behind a dimple like a falling star. You don't ask why they came back. They don't ask why you stayed. Here's your obscure cultural crumb. In a fragment of a lost play attributed to Menander, a woman tells a wandering sailor, "My oven knows more of the gods than your priest." She says it while kneading dough into the shape of an eye. Historians still debate whether it was metaphor or simple truth. Your oven doesn't know everything, but it knows enough to hold warmth when it's offered. You finish the repairs and sit back. The air smells like riverbanks and scorched thyme. You could light it now, bake something celebratory, but instead you just rest your hand on the side. Purrs softly. Good oven. The festival arrives, uninvited but welcome. It spills into the village like a slightly drunk uncle. Too loud, wearing bells, offering figs. Banners go up, songs burst from doorways. Someone paints a goat gold. You don't ask why. You just bake. Sweet bread today. Twists of honey and sesame, braided with strands of dried orange peel. You stack them on trays made from old cartwheels and broken door frames. Nothing goes to waste, not even the mistakes. The air is thick with smoke and stories. Children race by your window shouting about snakes, or maybe saints. You can't hear them clearly over the lute and the laughter. Here's your historical fact. Ancient Greek festivals, particularly rural ones like Anthesteria or Thesmophoria, often included ritual breads, some shaped like flowers, others like little animals. These breads were sometimes thrown into sacred pits, sometimes eaten, and sometimes worn briefly as hats. You consider wearing one of your loaves as a hat, but only briefly. Instead, you give them away. One to the woman who sings too loud. One to the boy who never stops asking about the stars. 3 to the neighbor whose garden smells like wet peppercorns. Here's your obscure myth moment. A minor nymph named Sima, mentioned only once in a scroll too moldy to fully read, was believed to gift festival bread that brought vivid dreams. If you ate it before sundown, you'd remember your past life. If after, you'd forget your name but wake laughing. No one remembers where Sima lived. You place one loaf on your own doorstep just in case. The stranger arrives as the sun dips below the hill. You both sit on the roof, sharing bread and watching the goats attempt choreography. One of them succeeds. The stranger leans over, brushing crumbs from your sleeve. "You're not very good at being forgotten," they murmur. You smile a little wistfully. "No one ever is." You offer them the last twist of bread. "Eat before sundown," you whisper. "Or after. It's all the same eventually." The sun disappears. The dream begins. You wake early. Not because you must. There's no line outside, no fire demanding your attention. But because the morning is soft. The kind of pale, unbothered light that nudges you up like an old friend. Not an alarm. There's a loaf waiting by the oven. You didn't bake it. It's warm, sweet, shaped like a sleeping cat. On top, a single bay leaf, and a tiny thumbprint in the crust. You smile before you remember to be suspicious. The stranger is gone. Or maybe they were never quite here in the way mortals mean. You eat the loaf anyway. It tastes like cardamom, cedar, and something older. Something from before there were words for taste. Here's your historical fact. Bay leaves were often used to flavor bread and cakes in ancient Mediterranean cultures, not for taste, but to infuse a sense of the sacred. Laurel, in particular, was thought to ward off forgetfulness and inspire dreams. The village is quiet today, recovering from festivities, hungover on sugar and memory. You take a slow walk, past the stone well with the loaf-shaped rock beside it, past the tree you used to sleep under, back when sleeping meant something different, past the temple steps, now faded and vine-wrapped, where children draw faces on pebbles and leave them like offerings. You feel full, not with food, just with presence. Here's your obscure cultural trace. Some mystery cults believed immortals could, after enough time, slow down into mortality, not by force or punishment, but by permission. A divine sleep of choice, not exile, just rest. Historians still debate whether this was metaphorical or literal, or if the whole idea was made up by a philosopher who hadn't slept in weeks. But you wonder, because you feel it too, that slow draw toward the earth, toward the warmth of ovens and moss, toward being forgettable and fondly remembered in equal measure. Today, no one needs bread, so you bake one loaf anyway, just for yourself. You shape it like a spiral, like a memory trying to come back, like a path you might still walk barefoot if your knees allowed it. The fire crackles. You hum, and somewhere in the distance, a very small god blesses your dough. The oven is still warm, but your hands are still. You sit beside it, eyes half closed, listening to the tick of cooling stones and the hush of evening settling like flower dust across the village. A breeze stirs the curtain, just enough to move the air, not enough to ask anything of you. Outside, the sky is lavender, the kind of color you only get when the day forgets to be dramatic. You breathe in slow. Bread, thyme, cedar. The familiar hush of nothing important happening. Your name doesn't come back tonight, but it doesn't need to. You remember the feel of your hands in dough, the rhythm of your steps on cobblestone, the laughter of a child who once asked if you were secretly a goddess. You answered by handing him a tart. There is, in the end, a kind of immortality in repetition. The same oven, the same bread, the same quiet love, baked into crusts and shared at doorways. You lean back, shoulders heavy, content. Let the loaves rise without you for once. Let the stars twinkle in someone else's sky. You've done enough baking for one lifetime. Or 3. Sleep finds you in the warm spot between thought and silence. The part of night where time curls inward and memories taste like cardamom. And somewhere, perhaps, the stranger places a fresh loaf at another doorstep. The cat-shaped one. Still warm. Still singing.